Happy 4th of July, Shavua Tov, a good Vach. How are you, my holy sisters and brothers across the land and around the world? It's great to be with you, albeit pretty late on a Saturday night. Last Shabbat and this Shabbat are the latest that Shabbat is going to end this year. From now on, it's slowly, very slowly, but steadily going to end a little bit earlier. I doubt the mic is picking it up. But outside my office right now, it's just a rolling thunder of fireworks across the city. We're celebrating the 4th of July. And for all its many problems, I am very thankful to live in America. I'm essentially an American by choice. I was born in Chile. My family moved to the United States when I was 5. And when I was 18, I became an American citizen and took the oath to love this country and defend its flag. And I'm a very proud American and have been ever since. So I hope that the blessings of liberty are smiling upon you wherever you may be. Let us light up the darkness. Who is in the house with us on this Saturday night, this festive Saturday night? Sandy McMurray says Michigan is in the house. Sharon Frant Brooks says Shavua Tov from Lebanon, New Jersey. Christo Cheney says Shavua Tov from Lubbock, Texas. Rochelle Rosen looking at the full moon in Modesto, California. Ian Chamberlain, Shavua Tov from Phoenix, Arizona. Deborah Davidson McPhee from Tucson. Sharon Frant Brooks says happy 4th. Bill Eldridge, hello from a very noisy with illicit fireworks, Berkeley, California. Sylvia Corona from Pasadena, Texas. Rochelle Rosen says pray for the folks with PTSD. You know, I really take that to heart, Rochelle. It's funny, I'm wearing my Maccabiah Games USA jacket. I participated in 2015 in the Maccabiah Games and in 1985. I was a rower on the USA team to the Maccabiah Games in Israel, and we were training in Philadelphia on the 4th of July in 1985. My goodness, 35 years ago. And there was a big free concert in the park in Philadelphia. Elton John played. It was amazing, an all-day free concert in the park. And then at the end, when we were all leaving the park, it was nighttime, and the fireworks were everywhere all over the park, but not like distant in some other part of the city. It could go off anywhere around you at any time. And it was scary. It was really scary. And I knew that, we were not in any real danger, but it really made my heart go out to soldiers defending our country and every country that people fight for, these young guys and women in a battle where people are really trying to kill them, and those explosions going off very near them at any time to kill them, and much louder and stronger. And so really, we owe a great debt of gratitude to the women and men who defend our liberties on battlefields. Thank you for your service. And it's something to remember when we're hearing these fireworks. So good point, Rochelle, about PTSD and fireworks. Tana Reichba Ben Hayim says, Shalom from Yerushalayim. Great to see you, Tana. Christo Cheney says, nice American flag, Sal. Brian Bloomfeld says, Shavua Tov from Cambridge, Massachusetts. Ray, you're singing. You have good ear and pitch. Take a couple of voice lessons and you will be an amazing chazan. Thank you for being nice. Chazan is not on the horizon for me. Robert Clemens says, yes, very noisy here. Lots of fireworks. Sheila Jefferson is in from Indiana. Melissa Eitel-Jurin says, happy 4th. Raphael Abramov says, Shavua Tov, my friend. Denver, Colorado is in the house. It's great to be with you all, my friends, on this 4th of July. Okay, let us see. I assume it's broadcasting. It's just that my Facebook is stuck here. No problem. All right. We are holding on page 120 That's Kuf Chaf. And we're in chapter 16. Today we're going to cover Mishnahs 4 and 5. And finally, we're going to get to the question which you'd think we would have covered at the beginning of this chapter. This chapter is all about what happens if a fire breaks out on Shabbos. And we began by saying what are the things that we can save from a fire as basically the exception to the rule, with the general rule being that we can't extinguish the fire and we can't save things from a fire except for holy writings and as much food as we need for the meals that remain on Shabbos. That's what we've done so far. And then yesterday, if you haven't seen yesterday's show, page 119 of Tractate Shabbos, the second volume of the Talmud, you got to go back and see that show. It's a key daf. Yesterday's page had so many beautiful, beautiful teachings about Shabbos and about life. And, it's just one of those wonderful pages full of digressions that were spectacular. Now we're getting back to the subject at hand. In Mishnah number 4, we're going to talk a little bit more about what we can rescue in terms of food and some other objects. And then in Mishnah number 5, we're finally going to get to the question that this chapter is all about, the fire itself. The fire itself. What may we do to put out the fire or to cause the fire to be extinguished? And now I'm just going to give away the ending and where we're headed because it's so vitally important to understand this. When we get to Mishnah number 5, we're going to discuss the difference between the halacha, the holding of law, in the times of Chazal, our sages of blessed memory, and now. Because the laws that we've been discussing were all in a context where it was considered against Jewish law. I mean, you can't extinguish a fire. We can't ignite a candle on after Shabbos has begun, and I can't put out a candle after Shabbos has begun. But when we're talking about any kind of a fire that breaks out, a fire, even that it's small, but it could potentially be dangerous, in Talmudic times, they wouldn't put it out. And they would say, suffer the loss, save what you can of the things that are permitted to save, but it's God's will. That changed. It changed in medieval times, and we're going to discuss why it changed. It's actually fascinating. But the law today is if a fire breaks out on Shabbos in your home, even a small one, but it has any kind of a potential that it could become a dangerous fire that could harm not even just life, but cause significant loss, financial loss, like a house burning down or even a part of a house burning down or furniture burning up, any kind of real danger that fire would cause if it got bigger, you put out that fire immediately. Thank God the law is like that. It just makes so much more sense to us. But how did the law become that way? That's quite interesting, and we'll get to that a little bit later when we discuss Mishnah number 5. Now let's talk about Mishnah number 4. So now we're still in the context of the law as it was in Talmudic times. So, what may we rescue? We've already talked about we can rescue enough food for the number of meals that remain on Shabbos and for all the people who are going to be joining us for those meals. And we talked about there was a dispute whether or not one can use artifice to say, well, I'm going to invite 100 people after I get this stuff outside of the fire, so I'm going to take enough food for them. There was a dispute about that. Now here in Mishnah number 4, we learn, well, if you have a large vessel, like a basket that contains 100 loaves of bread, or a huge cake of dried figs, which is super heavy and like it's enough figs, for an army, or if you have a barrel of wine, in other words, much more food and drink than you need for the 3 meals, but it's already contained in one vessel, so you can pick up the vessel and take it outside, even though it has more food than you need, because why? Once you're picking up the vessel, it doesn't matter how much is in it, you can take it outside and rescue it from the fire. Now, you can only do that once. You can only do that once, right? Now in fact, we're going to learn in the Gemara of that Mishnah, you can even take a cloak, spread it open on the ground, and even so it wasn't full before, right? Already in the Mishnah, we learned that there's a basket and it's filled with loaves of bread. Okay, so you can carry the whole thing out. And now we're told you can actually spread a cloak on the ground and put all the stuff in it of a permitted nature to save on Shabbos, meaning the food or the utensils to eat the food. Somebody asked the other day, can we take the whole table, the Shabbos table, because it's a base for the food that's on it? I'm still not sure about that because a table is not a vessel. But here we're learning, in the Bedouin world, a cloak, like a big leather hide, actually was used as a table. So maybe, I'm not sure about that. But you can spread out a cloak and just pile all this food and utensils that you're going to need to eat the food. As long as you can carry it in one trip, you can take that outside. Where can you take it to? A courtyard that has been made into an Eruv. And so presumably if you live in a city that has an Eruv and you're within the Eruv, so you can just take it outside into the Eruv. Ben Becerra says a courtyard that hasn't been made into an Eruv, but he's still talking about a courtyard, so that's a little bit tricky. Let me just make that do not disturb. Okay. Regarding clothing, this is interesting. Okay, now with regards to the food, so once you've taken either this one big trip, right, with the basket of loaves, or the barrel of wine, or each of those can be a trip, but if you do a cloak and pile stuff into it, it's just one time that you can do that. So now you've sort of reached the maximum of what you can carry. And understand that the reason the sages said that it's only enough food for the 3 meals or this one trip or one vessel per type of food, and then you can't take more, it's not actually a biblical prohibition at that point. It's a rabbinic prohibition to forbid you from taking more, because they said if you keep making trips, you're going to come to extinguish the fire, right? In your turmoil and stress and the trauma of trying to save things from the fire, and you keep going in to get more, and then the fire is coming close to these things that you're trying to save, a person is likely to at least put out a little bit of the fire, right? Stamp on a little bit that's coming close to the stuff he's trying to save. And that's why they said it's not going to be like that. You can only make this one trip, or basically one trip, at least per category. But that's for you, the homeowner. So now here in the Mishnah, it says you can say to your neighbors, okay, I've taken all I can take. Come and take for yourselves, or come and save for yourselves. Because they are not the homeowner. They don't have that same restriction where they're going to be so traumatized that they're going to come to put out the fire while they're saving objects, because they don't have the same emotional meaning to the neighbors. So you say to your neighbors, come and save for yourselves. Now this is interesting. Why are you saying come and save for yourselves? You might have thought that the person would say, come and help me save stuff from the fire. But no, he's already taken everything that's rabbinically permitted for him to take out of the house. So that means that what's left in the house is legally considered as ownerless because he has despaired of it. He can't save it, so that stuff is now considered ownerless. So now the neighbors can come and save those things, and they're saving for themselves. They're taking found objects, right, that have been despaired of. They can keep it. Legally, they could keep it. Now, of course, they shouldn't keep it. And what the Mishnah says is, and if the people are wise, then after Shabbos, they will make an accounting for wages. And by wise, the Gemara explains, they mean pious, that these people are pious. In other words, they'll help you save stuff. And even though legally they could keep it for themselves, of course they're not going to do that. They're going to give it to you because they want it just to help you, and they're going to say let it stay with the original owner. They're not going to keep it for themselves. But if they like, they can say, I worked hard on Shabbos. I ruined my Shabbos. I even took some risk to help you save your stuff. If you'd like to reward me, I would take a little reward. And that kind of thing is okay, and it's not considered working for wages on Shabbos but rather a kind of reward for piety because they helped you save stuff during that fire on Shabbos. That's with regard to food and utensils for eating food. You can also save clothing, again, because this is something that you need for that Shabbos. You need clothes on Shabbos. So the person can take, and now that you can save clothes, you can save as much as you can put on your body, and you can keep going in and out and put clothes on your body, walk out, take them off, go inside, put on clothes. Some opinions say you can only do that once, but with as much as 18 garments on your body. But the halakha back then was you could go in and out, and take as many clothes as you could take. Now, if you can't get all the clothes, now you can say to the neighbors, come and help me save. Not save for yourselves. Come and help me save my clothes. What is the difference between clothes and food? The food, except for the idea that if it was already in one vessel or it fits in one vessel, you could take more. But otherwise, the limitation is how much food you can eat on that Shabbos, you and your guests, let's say. But clothing is unlimited. Why? Because if a person wants to, he can change his clothes, every 5 minutes all day long on Shabbos. So theoretically, you could wear all of the clothes in your wardrobe on Shabbos so that you never despair that, okay, you've reached the limit of what you're allowed to carry out. You can go in and out, putting on clothes and carrying them outside. Why are you wearing them rather than carrying? Because then you could do that even if there was not an Erev, right? Even if there was not an Erev that you could carry outside to. But since there's no limit, now you're just asking people to help you save the clothing from the fire. That's the difference between clothing and food. And that's basically what goes on in Mishnah number 4. Mishnah number 5. Now we're finally dealing with the fire itself. So, as I mentioned at the beginning of this session, and it's going to be a short session tonight because it's really loud here with the fireworks outside, and I want to get back to Nina and the kids. But okay, so dealing with the fire itself. As I mentioned at the top of the class, in Talmudic times, the basic ruling was, we know we can't kindle a fire on Shabbos, and we know we cannot extinguish a fire on Shabbos. And so this would apply even to a fire that was going to consume our belongings, maybe even consume the house. It was thought to be a mark of just great piety that, okay, you know what, things are not that important. For some reason, this fire happened on Shabbos, and I'm going to deal with it. That changed in the Middle Ages. And now, today, we extinguish a fire that has any potential of becoming a dangerous fire. And it's only some kind of a very small fire that we definitely could safely contain without having to directly extinguish it, where today we would behave as is being recommended to us in the Mishna and its Gemara on this subject of extinguishing a fire that breaks out on Shabbos. So we got to keep that straight. In the old days, you couldn't put it out. Today, you can. And it's only a very small fire that we would approach in the same way that they did back then. And then I'll explain how it changed. Okay, so dealing with a fire itself. Since in the old days they were not allowed to put out the fire, what would they do? They would look for an indirect way to stop the fire from spreading and possibly even cause it to be extinguished, but not extinguishing it directly. So one way to do that is you would take, let's say, a hide of a sheep and wet the hide, right? Now you can't take this wet blanket, this wet wool blanket essentially, a wet sheepskin, and put it right on the fire because that would extinguish the fire. But you could put it next to the fire in the path where, its fuel lay, so that it would then hit the blanket, and then it would encounter something that would not burn, and then the fire would naturally go out. That was one way to approach it. Another way to approach it is you could erect a barrier, let's say of vessels, that would stop the fire. And particularly effective, if you happen to have it around, and they had a lot more of this around in those times, was new earthenware vessels, right? Just think like pots that we, like clay pots that we put plants in, but without the hole in the bottom. So if you put a bunch of clay vessels, new earthenware vessels with water in them, in the way of the fire, then when the fire got close to them, it would actually cause the earthenware to crack, the water would come out, and it would extinguish the fire. That was permitted. Rabbi Yosei would prohibit because it's too much like extinguishing, right? It's causing the fire to be extinguished, and while it was indirect, for Rabbi Yosei, it was too close to actually extinguishing the fire. But the sages permitted one to do that. And then we get into a big discussion here in the Gemara of this Mishnah, discussing, well, what is exactly the argument between Rabbi Yosei and the other rabbis? Because Rabbi Yosei in a different Mishnah might agree and might disagree, and it has to do with, if you for some reason had a name of God written in ink on your arm, were you permitted to immerse in the mikvah? Right? What you're certainly not allowed to do is, if you write the name of God, just rub it off your skin, because now you're erasing a name of God. If you just walk into the mikvah, into a body of water, you immerse in water, and there's the name of God written on your skin, the water might cause it to disintegrate and be erased, but you didn't directly erase it, you caused it to be erased. And so the argument goes along those lines: do we permit that? The sages did permit that, but they would say tie a reed of grass around it. But if you're immersing in a mikvah, there can't be anything interposing between the water and your skin. So why were they saying that? And the end of the argument was, it's just that you don't want to have a name of God in front of you when you get into a mikvah, because you're naked, right? And you exposing yourself is not something you should do in front of a divine name, in front of the name of God written out in ink. So you put this loose band of like a reed of grass that's not interposing between you and the water, but that hides it from your view. Rabbi Yosei would say that's not necessary. You just put your hand over it. And then they ask, well, the rabbis, why don't they say put your hand over it? And the argument turned on whether, you should go find that reed of grass if it causes you to be a little bit later than would have been the ideal time for you to immerse. This is in the case that you were tameh, you were ritually impure, you needed to become purified at the first possible moment. And it's a long digression. We don't really have to get into it. What matters is, in those days, the rabbis would permit you to do this indirect extinguishing of the fire, because they were trying to give people the benefit of the doubt so they could put out a fire. And Rabbi Yosei was more machmir. He was more stringent in saying, look, the law is you can't put out a fire. Now, as I've said a couple times already, this changed. Why did it change? Let me read to you. Here's an article from the Orthodox Union on their website. And so it's getting the halacha from the Mishna Berura, or Olam Mishna Berura. So, may a fire burning out of control, but that is not of direct danger to human life, be extinguished on Shabbos. So we said at the beginning of our discussion, if human life is in danger, there's no question, because we desecrate Shabbos to save a life. There's no question there. But what about a fire that is not directly threatening human life, but could burn the house down? Like everybody already got out, now the house could burn down. So in Talmudic times, they would let that fire burn. But now here's the law. In almost all situations, even if there is no direct threat to any human life, a fire burning out of control, which cannot be easily and quickly contained, may be extinguished on Shabbos. Even if there is only a small chance that the fire will not be able to be contained, something which is true of most fires, it may be extinguished on Shabbos. All Shabbos prohibitions, both min haTorah and mid derabanan, in other words, biblical prohibitions and rabbinic prohibitions, may be overridden in order to extinguish a fire, even if it just potentially can get out of control and that cannot be easily and quickly contained, right? So if it's easily and quickly contained, that there's just zero danger. Okay, so then you could, do one of these like little, like some kind of a rig, like put some paper cups or plastic cups filled with water around the fire. And when the fire reaches them, the water will get out of the cup will melt, the water will get out and put out the fire. And it's sort of nice to do that little demonstration for your kids. But that's because it's totally safe. And what fires really are so safe that you would want to do that, so small and safe? So every other kind of fire that breaks out on Shabbos, we put it out. This was not always the case. In the times of our sages and through the days of the early Rishonim, so that's the next generations of commenters after the Amoraim. So the Amoraim were active from about 200 to the year 500 of the Common Era, and the Rishonim were the next, several hundred years of commenters. Okay. And through the days of the early Rishonim, there were severe limitations regarding extinguishing a fire on Shabbos. In those days, unless the fire was a direct threat to human life, it was forbidden to extinguish a fire on Shabbos. Not only was it forbidden to transgress these biblical prohibitions, but even rabbinic prohibitions, such as a direct command to a non-Jew to extinguish the fire, were not permitted. In other words, you can inform, this happens all the time actually, like you can't, let's say if you're an Orthodox Jew and you're in a hotel and the air conditioning is like too strong in your room. So like you can't touch the air conditioning, you can't like change the electronics. That's something you just have to live with. But you're in a hotel. So there's a staff there who's not Jewish, who, there's no problem with them changing the temperature of the air conditioning. But you actually can't go to the staff and say, please, I'm Jewish, please change the air conditioning for me. That's a direct request. What you could say is, it's really cold in my room. It's really, really cold in my room. The air conditioning is so cold. Oh, sir, you just, change the button like this. Oh, I can't do that. You can't request that they do it for you. This is a rabbinic prohibition. That's something we're not allowed to do on Shabbos. We can't ask a non-Jew to do for us. People will say, oh, but isn't that what a Shabbos goy is? A non-Jew can do things on Shabbos that we're not permitted to do, and arrangements can be made so those things happen before Shabbos. But on Shabbos, you can't cause someone to do something for you that you yourself cannot do because it's as if you did it. Okay. In addition, Chazal, our sages, placed severe limitations on removing food and clothes, which were not necessary for Shabbos, since the rabbis were concerned that while the removal of those items will be taking place, one will become distracted and inadvertently extinguish the fire. That's what we've been talking about here in chapter 16. Thus, they permitted only the barest minimum of food and clothes to be removed, and the rest of the fire was lost or consumed by the fire. But all of that changed during the Middle Ages. Both the Beis Yosef and Rama write that since we reside among the non-Jewish population, we no longer have the option to allow a fire to continue burning even when human life is not directly threatened. The basic rationale behind this ruling is based on the historical fact that when a fire was burning out of control, the non-Jewish population was keen on looting and pillaging. Right? So we have to go back in history and understand what was going on in the Middle Ages. It was simply very dangerous for the Jews. They lived in a diaspora. They lived among non-Jews. Anti-Semitism, you can't really call it anti-Semitism. You could call it virulent Jew hatred. So we lived among people who hated us so much that, like the pogroms we've heard of happening in Russia in the early 1900s and 1800s. I mean, that was just a fact of life for 1,000 years, more. I mean, everywhere Jews lived, at any moment, it could erupt into terrible lynchings, pillaging, looting, etc. And if Jewish property was on fire, it was like an invitation to the looters and pillagers to come and steal stuff. Thus, it was established, and since many Jews would not sit idly by as their home was being looted and they were likely to stand up to try and defend their property, the confrontation could quickly develop into a life-threatening situation. Thus, even though the initial fire was not a life-threatening situation, in the historic circumstances where Jews lived, it could so easily become a life-threatening situation. So the halakhic authorities established at that time that all fires which cannot be quickly contained and may spiral out of control are permitted to be extinguished, and one should not delay in doing so. Even nowadays, when looting and pillaging is less likely, the ruling remains firm, both around the world and in Israel. So even where we're a majority Jewish population, where there's no danger that non-Jews will come and threaten our safety because there's a fire going on, the rule is now permanently ensconced. If a fire breaks out on Shabbos, we put it out. Don't even think twice about it. Now, obviously, when human life is not being directly threatened or endangered, or in the atypical case where the fire can be quickly contained, whatever can be done to minimize desecration of Shabbos should be done. If the fire, for instance, can be extinguished indirectly, for example, by placing tied bags or cups of water or wet towels around it, or by quickly asking a non-Jew to call the fire department, okay, so that should be done. But it is forbidden to be stringent about these matters. This is an area where we don't try to be more pious than our neighbor and say, oh, well, God sent the fire and I don't really want to put it out because in the old days we had a law that we didn't put it out. Have I been clear? If a fire breaks out on Shabbos, we put out the fire. That is the law. If any doubt whatsoever exists about the potential danger of the fire, then one must do whatever it takes in the quickest way possible to make sure that that does not happen. The last thing I'll say before I get to questions is that in that same article from the OU, from the Orthodox Union, it first spells out at great length that a Jew, and here I'll say that a person with a brain in his head, should do everything in their power to be careful about their home and prevent fires from breaking out. We should have smoke alarms. We should have fire alarms. We should have fire extinguishers. It's funny, I was just sitting in my living room today before I read this page and looking. We have a fire extinguisher near the fireplace, but I haven't checked that fire extinguisher is current, that it still would work. I haven't checked it in a long time. So that's on me. I need to replace that fire extinguisher. And any other kind of good, sensible, reasonable precautions that a person could take to protect their home and their loved ones from the danger of a fire on any day is something that you should do. Not just do because it's common sense, but do because preserving life is the halacha. It's the law. You do what you can to preserve life. So in advance of these things happening, a person should do what they can to prevent danger from visiting their home. Okay. Brian of Bloomfield, I got your comment at the beginning. Thank you. I don't sing too much, but you give me confidence to do a little more. David Blackard says, Happy Brexit 1.0 day, sir. It's referring to Independence Day from Britain. Okay, thank you, David. And I'm not sure what this question means, so let me just check if there's any others. I don't see it. Okay. Bill says, question, notwithstanding that the law is what it is now, if a Jew lived in a city with a primitive fire brigade, would calling them be a direct request? Well, I think what it said in the article is, if it would be preferable, right, to have a non-Jew call the fire department for you, right? But otherwise, you're saying notwithstanding what the law is now. Obviously, we call the fire department. We actually open the cell phone, do whatever we need to do to save, anything from a fire. We put out the fire. We override all the other laws to put out the fire. But what you're asking me is, when is something a direct request and when isn't it? And basically, the way I've heard it is like you don't even say when you're talking about the air conditioning in your hotel room, like you don't say to them at the front desk, I'm a Jew and I can't turn the air conditioning on and off, so if somebody could do it for me, that would be great. That's too direct. And so I remember we met a guy on one of our trips and he said, oh yeah, they must have hated me because like in that hotel, the air conditioning was either too strong and like you couldn't sleep because you're freezing, or if it's off, it got too hot. And so like, he went down to that front desk, 3 times during the night and said, oh man, it is really cold. It is really cold. Oh, sir, I showed you how to turn that off, or I showed you how to turn that on. Yeah, you did, but it's just so cold. And he couldn't make the direct request. And so he would rather, be embarrassed for acting like an idiot than make the direct request. So that's kind of how we handle it, even though it's ridiculous. But as we've clarified now, and I think I said it 10 times for emphasis, for a fire, we do whatever we need to do. Even if it's not directly endangering human life, we put out the fire that breaks out on Shabbos. And finally, Lynn says, good news to hear about the allowance to put out the fire, especially on a day like this when the 4th of July is coinciding with Shabbos. The fireworks are going off all around us, and it always makes me nervous. And that's Lynn talking from Texas. I can tell you here in LA, since I've been talking to you tonight, it has not slowed down at all. It is really loud outside. So that's what I've got for us today. May you all be blessed with a safe and joyous 4th of July and a safe and joyous and meaningful and healthy week. You should have a Shavua Tov, a good week, a good Vach in Yiddish. And with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow at our regular time of 6 p.m. Pacific. Sending you all big love.